Hello. I always believed that betrayal was something you felt in your gut before you ever saw the proof. A lingering unease, a whisper in the back of your mind telling you something wasn't right. But when I found out my wife was sleeping with my best friend, there was no whisper. No gut feeling. Just cold, undeniable reality staring back at me from the screen of her unlocked phone. It wasn't dramatic. No scandalous messages begging for secret meetups, no desperate confessions of love. Just a routine conversation between two people who had done this before, who were comfortable in their deception. Same time tomorrow? My husband thinks I'm meeting Claire. Of course. Love the excuse. She's really buying you cover without even knowing it. She always was too trusting. I stared at those words for a long time. My wife, the woman I had spent the last 8 years building a life with, lying without hesitation. My best friend, a man I had known since college, mocking me in private like I was some clueless fool in their little game. It was almost laughable. Almost. Most men, upon finding something like this, would explode. They'd scream, break things, demand answers, maybe even beg for an explanation. But I'm not most men. I don't act on impulse. I don't give people the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I do something much worse. I plan. I slipped her phone back onto the nightstand, adjusting it at the exact angle she had left it, then walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. My reflection stared back at me calm, controlled. Not a man who had just discovered the love of his life was nothing more than a liar with a good poker face. Not a man who was about to confront his cheating wife. No, I was something else entirely now. By the time I slid back under the covers beside her, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, I already knew what I was going to do. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to leave. And I sure as hell wasn't going to give her the opportunity to manipulate her way out of this. I was going to destroy her from the inside out. And the best part? I was going to use the very same excuse she had given me. Claire. The best friend my wife had always leaned on. The one woman she never saw as a threat. The woman she trusted unconditionally. The same way I had once trusted her. I was going to make her feel every ounce of this betrayal. And I was going to do it slowly. My life had always been built on structure. Routine. Stability. I wasn't the kind of man who made reckless decisions or chased fleeting excitement. I believed in consistency, in building something solid, something that couldn't be shaken by life's unpredictability. And for a long time, I believed that's exactly what I had with Emily. Mornings were always the same. I woke up before her, stretching out the stiffness in my muscles before making my way to the kitchen. Coffee first, 2 cups, just the way we liked it. Mine black, strong, no sugar. Hers, with just a splash of oat milk, a habit she had picked up after deciding dairy was horrible for gut health 1 year ago. I'd place her cup on the nightstand before waking her with a kiss on the forehead. She'd murmur a soft, drowsy you're the best, before curling into the warmth of the sheets for just 5 more minutes. That was our rhythm. A quiet, unspoken understanding. The way she'd sneak up behind me while I read the morning news, wrapping her arms around my waist, pressing her cheek against my back. The way we'd stand at the kitchen counter, half asleep, sipping coffee in comfortable silence before the world outside demanded our attention. Evenings weren't much different. We both worked long hours, me running operations at an expanding logistics firm, her balancing corporate consulting with an ever-growing social calendar. Yet, we always made time for dinner. A home-cooked meal when schedules allowed, a quiet restaurant when neither of us had the energy to cook. Conversations were easy, filled with light teasing, shared frustrations about work, small details of the day that never felt insignificant. Looking back, everything seemed so perfect. But now, I wonder if it was always that way, or if I was just blind to the details. Because there were signs. Little things. Things I ignored because when you trust someone completely, you don't question their small changes. Like how she stopped reaching for my hand in public. It wasn't obvious, not at first. But I noticed, on some level, how she subtly shifted away instead of intertwining her fingers with mine like she used to. I told myself it was nothing. Just a change in habit. Or how she started spending more time with Claire. That one didn't even seem strange. I had always liked Claire. She had been Emily's best friend since college, the kind of woman who radiated warmth, who laughed easily and made everyone around her feel comfortable. She and I had always been friendly, even close. So when Emily started mentioning more girls' nights, more impromptu brunches, more Claire needs me right now moments, I never questioned it. Why would I? Claire had always been one of the good ones. And then there was her phone. Emily had never been obsessive about privacy. We weren't the kind of couple who checked each other's messages or needed constant reassurance. But sometime over the last year, she became more guarded. Little things, flipping her phone face down on the table, taking her calls in another room, ending conversations just a little too abruptly when I walked in. It was small, manageable, nothing worth making accusations over. I see it now. The slow shift, the meticulous unraveling of trust, so well executed that I didn't even feel it slipping through my fingers. But in those moments, I wasn't worried. I had everything I wanted. A wife I loved, a home that felt like a sanctuary, a life that made sense. I had no reason to suspect that, behind the scenes, Emily was playing a different game entirely. It happened subtly, like a quiet shift in the air before a storm. Not an explosion, not an obvious betrayal, just a series of small, almost imperceptible changes that most people wouldn't even notice. But I noticed. Because when you've spent years with someone, you don't just know their habits, you feel them. The first time something felt off, it was late on a Tuesday evening. I had just come home from a long day at work, expecting the usual routine: dinner, a glass of wine, maybe a quiet night on the couch watching some forgettable Netflix series. Instead, I walked in to find Emily on the phone, her voice just a little too low, her tone too careful. She didn't notice me at first. She was standing by the kitchen counter, one hand gripping a glass of wine, the other wrapped around her phone. "I told you, I can't talk right now," she whispered sharply, turning slightly as if to make sure she was alone. Then, after a pause, she sighed. "I'll see you tomorrow. Just be patient." I took another step forward, deliberately letting my keys jingle as I set them on the entryway table. She turned instantly, too quickly, eyes widening for half a second before her expression smoothed over into practiced nonchalance. "Oh, hey," she said, forcing a smile. She ended the call without another word and set her phone down, screen facing down. It wasn't the first time she had taken a private call. It wasn't even the first time she had seemed tense about something. But something about this moment sat wrong. The way she hadn't even asked how my day was. The way her fingers hovered over her phone for just a second longer than necessary, as if debating whether to check for a message. "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my tone light, casual. She didn't hesitate. "Claire," she said smoothly, swirling the wine in her glass before taking a sip. "She's having drama with her latest guy. You know how she is." I nodded slowly, watching her. I didn't know how Claire was. She was blunt, open, always the first to rant about her problems over drinks. She wasn't the type to whisper about them like a secret that could ruin her life. Still, I didn't press. I just stored the moment away in the back of my mind, filing it under unanswered questions. The next red flag came 3 days later. Friday night. We had plans to meet up with some friends for dinner, nothing extravagant, just a casual outing. Emily had been excited about it all week, until an hour before we were supposed to leave. "I'm not feeling great," she said, rubbing her temple as she sat on the edge of the bed. "Might be a migraine coming on." I frowned. "You seemed fine earlier." She shrugged. "Yeah, well, it hit me out of nowhere." She didn't meet my eyes. I hesitated. Emily didn't get random migraines. She had stress headaches occasionally, sure, but she was the kind of person who pushed through everything. And yet here she was, canceling last minute, her voice a little too neutral, her expression just detached enough to make me wonder if she was already thinking about something else. Or someone. Still, I didn't argue. Instead, I leaned in, pressing the back of my hand to her forehead. "No fever," I said lightly. "Maybe you just need some rest." She smiled faintly, leaning into my touch. "Yeah, I think I'll just stay in and sleep." I nodded, got dressed, and left for dinner alone. But something didn't sit right. And that feeling only got worse when I got home a few hours later. The house was quiet. Dark. Too dark. I had expected to find Emily curled up in bed, maybe asleep already. Instead, the sheets were neatly untouched, the bedroom exactly how I had left it. No sign of her. Her phone wasn't on the nightstand. The bathroom light was off. I stood there for a long moment, scanning the space, trying to rationalize. Maybe she fell asleep on the couch? Maybe she was in the guest room? Then I heard it, the sound of rushed footsteps, followed by the quiet click of the front door locking. I turned, walking back down the hallway just in time to see Emily setting her purse down on the table, her face slightly flushed, her breathing just a little too measured, as if she had just rushed inside. She froze when she saw me. Just for a second. "You're back early," she said, forcing a casual tone. I glanced at the clock. It was almost midnight. Where were you? I asked, my voice calm. She blinked, just a fraction of a second too long before answering. I went for a drive. A drive? She nodded, running a hand through her hair, avoiding my gaze. Yeah, my headache was killing me, so I just needed some air. Her keys were still in her hand. Her jacket wasn't even fully zipped. I said nothing, just watched her. And for the first time in our entire relationship, I realized something terrifying. I didn't believe her. Not anymore. Doubt is a funny thing. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention. It just sits there, quietly, in the back of your mind, growing like a shadow stretching across the floor at sunset. At first, you tell yourself you're imagining it, that you're being paranoid, that it's just a trick of the light. But then the sun goes down, and all that's left is the darkness. That's where I was now. There were no more coincidences. No more innocent explanations. Emily was lying to me, and now, for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't going to ignore it. I wasn't going to ask her about it, either. No, I was going to do something much more dangerous. I was going to watch. It started with her phone. She had always been careless with it, leaving it lying around, never hiding her screen when she texted. But now? Now, it was always face down. Always in her pocket, even when we were just sitting at home watching TV. At first, I let it slide. Then, one evening, I casually reached for it while she was in the shower, just to check the time, something I'd done 100 times before. The screen didn't light up. It was off. I pressed the power button. Enter passcode. She changed it. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the numbers, a slow, cold certainty settling in my chest. I had never asked for her passcode before. Never needed to. She had never changed it in all the years we'd been together. But now, suddenly, she had a reason to? I set the phone back down exactly where it had been, walked out of the bedroom, and waited. When she came back out, towel wrapped around her, hair damp, she picked up the phone instantly, like she had been thinking about it the whole time. Her eyes flicked toward me, just for a second, before she turned away and started scrolling. I didn't react. I just added it to the list. Then there were the excuses. The sudden work meetings that lasted late into the night, but left no trace on her calendar. The dinners with Claire that she'd mentioned last minute, but never post about. Emily was a social creature, always updating, always snapping pictures. But now, her nights out had no evidence. No photos. No texts afterwards saying how fun it was. Just silence. So, I tested her. One evening, she told me she was going to Claire's place for dinner. I nodded, kissed her goodbye, and waited exactly 20 minutes before I called Claire myself. She picked up after the second ring, cheerful as ever. Hey, what's up? Not much, I said casually. Just checking in. Emily's with you, right? There was a pause. Not long, not dramatic, but just enough. Oh, Claire said slowly. Oh, no. I haven't seen her in a few days. I didn't blink. Really? She told me you guys were having dinner. Claire let out a nervous little laugh. Oh, maybe she meant she was picking something up for me? I asked her to grab a bottle of wine the other day. Maybe she's doing that. She was lying. Claire wasn't good at it. And Emily hadn't said anything about picking up wine. I kept my tone light. Yeah, maybe that's it. No worries. I hung up. Then I waited. Exactly 1 hour later, Emily came home, tossing her purse on the counter. God, Claire was a mess, she said, sighing. Her latest dating disaster is even worse than the last one. You wouldn't believe the stories. I watched her carefully. Yeah? What did she say? Emily launched into a detailed, animated story about Claire's non-existent night. Her hands moved as she spoke, her face expressive, her voice full of practiced concern. A lie so well rehearsed that I almost admired it. Almost. I nodded along, taking in every detail, storing it away, letting her think she had convinced me. That night, I waited until she was asleep. Then, I went to her car. Emily was meticulous about cleaning out her car, but nobody is perfect. It only took 2 minutes before I found what I was looking for, a receipt from a restaurant we had never been to, time-stamped right in the middle of her dinner with Claire. 2 entrees. 2 drinks. A table for 2. I stared at the slip of paper in my hand, feeling the last traces of doubt bleed away. She wasn't just lying. She was careful about it, which meant this wasn't new. And if it wasn't new, then how many nights had she looked me in the eyes and lied so effortlessly? I wasn't sure yet who the other plate had belonged to, but I would be soon. I slipped the receipt back exactly where I found it and walked back inside, sliding into bed beside her. She sighed softly in her sleep, shifting closer to me, her body warm and familiar. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking. She thought she was ahead of me. She thought she was playing this game alone. But I was watching now. And soon, I was going to win. Betrayal isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with a dramatic crash or a sudden revelation. It's quiet, subtle, a slow poisoning of trust, a whisper of doubt that grows into certainty. I had spent weeks watching, waiting, collecting the puzzle pieces of Emily's deception. But nothing prepared me for the moment when the puzzle finally came together. It was a Thursday night. She had told me she'd be working late, finishing up a big project that apparently demanded her full attention. I smiled, nodded, kissed her goodbye as she left the house. Then I followed her. She didn't go to the office. She didn't even hesitate. Her car weaved through the city streets with practiced ease, making sharp turns that spoke of a familiar route, a destination she had driven to many times before. I kept my distance, my heartbeat steady, my mind already anticipating what I was about to find. I wasn't hoping to be wrong. That part of me had died the moment she had looked me in the eyes and lied without hesitation. Her car finally slowed outside a boutique hotel, the kind designed for discretion, not luxury, not comfort, just privacy. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I watched her park, step out, adjust her hair in the reflection of the window. She wasn't checking into some late-night meeting. She wasn't going to see Claire. She was going to him. Then the final nail in the coffin, he was already waiting. Ryan. My best friend. I didn't react. Not outwardly. I just sat there, watching as my wife walked up to the man I had trusted for years, the man who had sat at my dinner table, who had toasted to my success, who had called me his brother. I watched as his hand rested on her lower back, as her lips curled into that same familiar smile she used to give me, back when I was the only man in the world she looked at like that. And then, as if fate wanted to make absolutely sure I didn't miss a single thing, I watched them kiss. It wasn't a mistake. Not a fleeting moment of regret. It was deliberate, slow, the kind of kiss that only exists between people who are completely comfortable in their betrayal. Something inside me settled then. Not anger. Not sadness. Something colder. I took my phone out and snapped a picture. 1, 2, 3. Enough to erase any doubt, not that there was any left. Then I put the phone away, gripping the steering wheel as I exhaled slowly. I should have felt something more. Rage. Heartbreak. The urge to storm in there and tear it all apart. But all I felt was clarity. Now I knew. And now? Now it was my turn to lie. I didn't go home. I didn't call her. Instead, I spent the night preparing. I gathered every receipt, every message, every detail she had ever let slip. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to dismantle everything they had built together. I went through our accounts, traced every shared expense, logged every time she had used her late meetings as a cover for her affair. Every piece of evidence fit together like a perfectly designed puzzle, a picture of deception that left no room for denial. I found the hotel's online system. With a little effort, I pulled up the reservation. 1 room. A week in advance. She had been careful, but not careful enough. I cross-referenced the dates with her, work meetings, and smiled. It had been going on far longer than I thought. Good. That meant I had time to plan something better. I moved on to Ryan. He was a risk analyst, someone who built his entire career on anticipating problems before they happened. And yet, he hadn't seen me coming. I checked his social media, his emails, everything I could access. His weakness was his reputation, his image as a loyal, dedicated businessman. He prided himself on trust, integrity, stability. And now, I had the power to take it all away. I printed out the pictures, booked a meeting with the right people, laid the groundwork for what was about to happen. By the time Emily walked through the door the next morning, acting as if nothing had changed, I had already rewritten the rules of the game. She just didn't know it yet. Revenge isn't about rage. It isn't about screaming or throwing punches or making dramatic threats. Those things are for men who have already lost control. I wasn't one of those men. I wasn't about to give Emily the satisfaction of seeing me break, of thinking she had wounded me beyond repair. No, my revenge would be quiet, precise, surgical. The kind of destruction that doesn't come from an explosion but from a slow, deliberate collapse. She wouldn't even realize the walls were crumbling until it was too late to escape. I spent the next 48 hours designing the perfect fall. Emily was strategic, careful with appearances, obsessed with her image. That was her weakness. She wasn't the kind of woman who feared losing money or material things. She feared irrelevance. She built her entire world around perception, around the idea that she was successful, powerful, admired. I wasn't going to take her money. I was going to take her status. Ryan was the key. He had positioned himself as a rising star in the finance world, a man built on trust, integrity, reliability. But he had a flaw. He had built his career on calculated risk, and what he didn't realize was that he had just placed the worst bet of his life. I dug deep. I didn't just collect proof of the affair. I collected every mistake, every weakness, every deal he had manipulated to stay ahead. There were skeletons in his closet, and I dragged every single one into the light. I set up a meeting with one of the company's top investors, a man I knew would do anything to protect his assets. I handed him everything. The proof of Ryan's affair, the questionable business transactions, the late-night hotel bookings listed under his corporate expense account. I watched as the man's expression shifted from mild curiosity to cold calculation. "This is enough to get him blacklisted," he muttered, shaking his head. "No firm will touch him after this." That's what I wanted. Ryan wasn't just going to lose his job, he was going to lose his future. Emily was next. She had no idea that I had already begun removing her from her own life. I systematically cut off every advantage she had. We had a joint bank account, but I had always kept my personal finances separate. I quietly transferred everything of value into private accounts under my sole ownership. She still had access to our home, but not for long. I contacted a lawyer, started the process of legally severing every tie that bound us together. I made sure she wouldn't see it coming until the very last second. Then, I turned to her social life. Emily thrived on influence, on being at the center of an elite circle of friends, colleagues, and acquaintances who respected her, envied her, wanted to be her. That was about to change. I started small, subtle whispers, well-placed truths, delivered to the right people. "Did you hear about Emily? Word is, she's been making some questionable choices." "Oh, you didn't know?" "There's proof. You might want to distance yourself before her reputation drags you down too." I made sure it never came from me directly. No, I let the rumors do the work for me. I didn't stop there. Emily's biggest upcoming event was an exclusive industry gala, an opportunity for her to show off, network, and solidify her influence. I ensured that by the time she walked into that event, she would be the last person anyone wanted to be seen with. I provided anonymous tips to a journalist with just enough damning evidence to make her the subject of hushed conversations and disapproving glances. The news wasn't just about her affair, it was about her character, her integrity, the way she had manipulated and deceived those closest to her. The story spread like wildfire. And then, the final stroke of the plan. I invited Claire to dinner. She hesitated at first, unsure why I had reached out. But when she arrived, and I laid everything out before her, the hotel receipts, the messages, the pictures, the lies that Emily had fed both of us, her hands shook. "She used me," Claire whispered, her face pale. "She used me as her excuse." Yes, she had. And now, I was going to use Claire to deliver the final blow. By the time Emily realized just how much she had lost, it would be too late to recover. Her career? Over. Her status? Destroyed. Her circle of friends? Vanished. And her perfect, untouchable image? Shattered beyond repair. She thought she had won. She thought she had played me. But the real game? Hadn't even started yet. Timing is everything. A poorly executed revenge is just a tantrum, an emotional outburst that satisfies nothing. But a perfectly timed strike? That's something else. That's power. That's control. That's making sure that, when the moment comes, there's no escape, no excuse, no second chance. Emily was about to learn that firsthand. The gala was her kingdom, a stage where she thrived, where she could smile, charm, and manipulate her way into anyone's favor. It was her chance to secure new business connections, to expand her influence, to be seen as untouchable. And that's exactly why I chose it as the place to burn everything down around her. She had no idea that, in the days leading up to the event, I had carefully positioned every piece. The whispers had spread, the quiet shifts in perception already beginning. Her name was no longer one that people wanted to be associated with. The investors who once rushed to shake her hand were now hesitant. The elite socialites who once admired her success were suddenly distant. And she hadn't even realized it yet. But she would. The night of the gala, she spent hours preparing. I watched her in the mirror as she applied her makeup, adjusting her earrings, her face glowing with anticipation. She looked at me and smiled. "You're quiet," she said playfully. Nervous about something? I smiled back. Not at all. She kissed my cheek, oblivious. Tonight's important, she murmured. For both of us. I almost laughed. We arrived at the venue in style, her arm wrapped around mine as cameras flashed. But the moment we stepped inside, she felt it. The shift. The unease. The way people weren't greeting her the same way they usually did. At first, she brushed it off, straightened her posture, moved toward familiar faces. But one by one, they turned away. And then, the final act began. At the exact right moment, the whispers turned into something louder. A journalist approached, polite but direct. Emily, would you care to comment on the allegations? She blinked, her confident smile faltering. Excuse me. The reports about your misconduct, he pressed. Your inappropriate use of company resources, your ethical violations. I saw the exact moment the panic hit her. It was small at first, just a tightening around her jaw, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. But as more people turned to listen, as more voices murmured, as screens began lighting up with articles, messages, pictures, her entire body went rigid. Someone pulled out a phone. Then another. Then another. There, for everyone to see, was the full exposure of her affair. The hotel receipts. The dinner reservations. The text between her and Ryan. Every single lie she had ever told displayed in high definition for the entire room to consume. She turned to me then, her eyes wide, desperate. You. I simply raised an eyebrow. That's when Claire stepped forward. I think you should tell them the truth, Emily, she said, her voice steady. Emily froze. The betrayal on her face was almost poetic. She had used Claire as her cover, had built her entire deception on trusting that Claire would never question her. And now, that same woman was the one standing against her. I never had those dinners with you, Claire continued, her voice carrying through the silent room. You used my name. You lied to me. To everyone. Ryan was nowhere to be seen. He had abandoned ship the second he saw the walls collapsing. Emily swallowed hard. This isn't. She turned to me again, searching for an escape, an ally, anything that could save her. I tilted my head slightly. Your move, I said softly. She had none. The final checkmate had already been played. The moment stretched. The cameras were still flashing, the crowd still watching, judging, deciding. And then, like a wound tearing open, her entire world collapsed. She wasn't just humiliated. She was finished. The moment stretched long and unbearable for Emily, but for me, it was perfect. The hushed voices around the room swelled into full-blown murmurs, people turning to one another, whispering, pointing, shaking their heads. The weight of their judgment crashed down on her, and I watched as it broke her in real time. Her carefully constructed confidence cracked, her posture stiffened, and her hands trembled as she reached for my arm like a lifeline. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the low buzz of the crowd. We can talk about this. I stepped back, just enough so that she stumbled forward slightly, her hand grasping at empty air. She blinked, genuine fear creeping into her expression now, not fear of me, but fear of what was happening, of how exposed she was, of the realization that there was no escape. The journalist's microphone hovered near her lips. Emily, would you care to comment? I don't know where this is coming from, she stammered, her eyes darting around wildly, looking for a friendly face, someone to step in, to rescue her. But no one did. She was alone. The people she once charmed, the colleagues who had once admired her, the investors who had seen her as an asset, all of them were watching her drown, and not a single one was reaching out to pull her up. This is fake, she tried, her voice rising in desperation. It's taken out of context. I need to speak to my lawyer. Claire scoffed softly beside me, crossing her arms. That's interesting. Because last week, when I asked you directly if you were cheating on your husband, you looked me in the eyes and lied. She turned to the crowd, her voice calm but cutting. She didn't just betray him. She used me. She used all of us. Ryan was still missing. Coward. But it was better this way. She couldn't deflect, couldn't turn the focus on him. This was her moment. Her destruction. Hers alone. I finally spoke, my voice even, steady, the voice of a man who had already won. You didn't just cheat, Emily. You built an entire world of lies, layer by layer. You thought you could manipulate everyone around you, but the thing about playing games is that eventually, someone else starts playing too. Her breathing hitched. I never meant. I tilted my head, watching her unravel. You never meant to get caught. She shook her head rapidly, tears forming in her eyes now, her panic reaching its peak. No, you have to understand. Understand. I echoed, letting the word hang in the air. You mean like how I tried to understand when I first noticed the lies? How I gave you every chance to be honest, and you still chose to deceive me? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, realizing too late that there was no explanation, no version of this story where she didn't come out looking exactly like what she was. A liar. A manipulator. A fraud. She turned again, this time toward the board members of the company she had built her reputation in. The ones who had once admired her, who had seen her as a strong, untouchable woman. You know me, she said frantically, her voice cracking. You know I wouldn't. One of them cut her off with a single look. We knew the version of you that you showed us. Clearly, there was more beneath the surface. Another investor shook his head, muttering, this is a PR disaster. And just like that, her career died in real time. She turned back to me now, her last remaining hope, her face wet with tears, her voice a desperate whisper. Please, you don't have to do this. I met her gaze, calm, unmoving. I'm not doing anything, Emily. I gestured toward the room, toward the cameras, the journalists, the murmuring crowd. You did this to yourself. A strangled noise escaped her throat as she stepped back, her breath coming in uneven gasps now, her reality crashing down faster than she could process it. She had spent so long believing she was in control, that she could dictate the terms of every situation. But this was out of her hands. Security approached now, quiet but firm. One of the event organizers whispered something into her ear, something about how they had to ask her to leave, how they couldn't risk further embarrassment for their brand, how it was best if she just walked away quietly. For the first time in her life, Emily had nowhere to go. Her hands clenched into fists, her breathing ragged, but there was no fight left in her. She wasn't just humiliated. She was finished. I watched as she turned, stumbling toward the exit, her once perfect posture now hunched, broken. The cameras followed her, the whispers growing louder, and I knew this moment would follow her forever. She had made me feel helpless once. She had made me question everything I thought was real. And now, she knew exactly how that felt. Emily's downfall wasn't instant. It wasn't a single explosion that wiped her out in one go. No, it was much slower than that, a series of doors closing, one after another, until she had nowhere left to turn. She tried to salvage her career first, reaching out to investors, former colleagues, anyone who still had influence. But the damage had already been done. Her name was now synonymous with scandal, deceit, and unprofessionalism. The business world doesn't forgive public embarrassment, and she had given them a spectacle they would never forget. No one returned her calls. No one wanted to be associated with her. She wasn't just losing her job, she was blacklisted. The reputation she had spent years carefully building was demolished overnight. She tried to recover socially next. She reached out to friends, the same people who used to look up to her, who once admired her strength and ambition. But now, they wanted nothing to do with her. People don't stay loyal to the ones who fall, especially when that fall is as public and humiliating as hers. Those she had once considered close suddenly weren't picking up her calls. Messages went unread. Invitations stopped coming. Even her closest allies distanced themselves, afraid of being dragged down by association. And then, there was her family. Emily's parents had always been proud of her success, flaunting their daughter's achievements like trophies at every gathering. But now she was a disgrace. A woman who had thrown away her marriage, her career, her dignity for an affair with a man who had abandoned her the second things went wrong. Her mother refused to even speak to her, mortified by the way Emily's name was circulating in hushed tones at dinner parties. Her father, a man who had always valued reputation above all else, was furious. How could you be so careless? That was the last thing he said before hanging up. She wasn't just alone. She was disowned. As for Ryan, he didn't stay. He had vanished the moment things fell apart, leaving her to deal with the fallout alone. I had made sure of that. The firm he worked for couldn't risk a scandal, so they cut him loose before he could even pack up his office. His future in finance? Over. He tried calling Emily a few times, maybe hoping for some kind of support, some kind of reassurance that they could get through this together. But there was no together anymore. They had both been using each other, and now that there was nothing left to gain, there was nothing left to hold on to. The last time she called him, he blocked her number. Her apartment lease ended 2 months after the scandal. Without a steady income, she couldn't afford to stay. She had to downgrade. No more penthouse, no more city views, no more luxury. The woman who once held her head high in designer clothes, who had walked into rooms expecting admiration, now moved through life like a shadow, unseen and unimportant. And me? I thrived. EtherTech had never been stronger. The company had gone public under my leadership, our stock soared, and investors flocked to the stability I had provided after cutting out the poison that had once been part of it. My professional reputation wasn't just intact, it was stronger than ever. The media painted me as the betrayed but resilient CEO, the man who turned personal devastation into success. And I let them. I didn't need to speak badly about Emily. Her actions had spoken loud enough. My personal life? Even better. The people who had once admired Emily's charm now saw the truth. They saw who had really built everything. And they made it clear whose side they were on. Women who had once envied Emily now looked at me differently. With respect. With interest. And why wouldn't they? I had come out of this stronger, smarter, untouchable. Emily, meanwhile, had become a ghost. She didn't reach out. She knew better. I heard through the grapevine that she had been looking for work, trying to restart her career somewhere new, but no company wanted to take the risk of hiring her. The scandal followed her wherever she went. No one would trust her again. She had lost everything. And the best part? I didn't have to do anything else. She had done this to herself. Months passed, but the echoes of Emily's downfall never faded. She had always believed that power came from control, controlling people, controlling perception, controlling me. But real power? Real power is never loud. It's quiet, precise, unshakable. It's knowing that when everything collapses, you'll still be standing while the ones who betrayed you are left scrambling in the dust. That's exactly what happened. Emily lost everything, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of the woman she once was. The whispers followed her everywhere. Every job interview, every networking event, every desperate attempt to regain what she had lost. People didn't see her as an accomplished woman anymore. They saw a liar, a cheat, a cautionary tale. No one wanted to be associated with her. She had burned too many bridges, and now she was stuck on the other side, alone. And yet, even after all this time, I couldn't help but wonder, what was she thinking now? Did she regret it? Did she stay up at night replaying every decision, every moment where she could have chosen differently? Did she ever think about me, about the man who had once trusted her without hesitation, before she decided to throw it all away? Or did she still believe, even now, that she could have somehow outplayed me? It didn't matter. Her opinions, her excuses, her self-justifications, none of it mattered anymore. Because she was nothing now. And me? I was everything she could have had but would never touch again. I never reached out to her. I never responded to the late-night messages she tried sending months after everything fell apart. I never answered the single phone call she dared to make before I had her number permanently blocked. She wasn't a part of my world anymore. And that was the worst punishment she could ever receive, to know that she had been erased, that she was irrelevant. She once thrived on being at the center of everything, but now? She was on the outside, looking in, watching as I continued to rise without her. Watching as someone else took her place. I ran into her once. By accident. It was in the city, outside a coffee shop I used to take her to one of her favorites, back when we were still us. I was with someone new. A woman who hadn't lied to me, who hadn't betrayed me, who wasn't just a reminder of everything I had lost, but proof of everything I had gained. I didn't notice Emily at first, but she saw me. I caught the way she froze, the way her fingers tightened around the cup she was holding, the way her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but she didn't. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. And then, just like that, I walked away without a second glance. That was the last time I ever saw her. Now, here's my question to you. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have let her walk away? Or would you have burned everything even further? Bye-bye.